Welcome, everybody, to our Provoke Global podcast. This year, as we approach our Provoke Global meeting in Washington, D.C., we are partnering with Unlock Health on some supplemental content for that event. And I am delighted to welcome today Shannon McIntyre Hooper, who is the president of Unlock Health, and Dan Lavelle, the chief strategy officer. And we're going to be talking a little bit about disruption and how the disruption of the last few years is redefining the agency world. But let's start by just getting a quick introduction to Unlock Health and tell me a little bit about your backstory and your mission.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us, Paul. It is such a pleasure to be here. So yeah, I can start with a little bit about who we are and what we're doing, and then we'll share a bit about my background. But Unlock Health officially launched in April of this year as a single source growth partner for healthcare providers. So what that means is our services actually span the full range of marketing communications, all channels, kind of reaching all audiences, a consulting offering, and then even some technology solutions that help connect that full ecosystem. And even though we're a new brand to the market, we're actually bringing together a number of different best-in-class teams via acquisition. So we're a fully functioning organization at this point. We've got about 140 people. We have 265 clients. Largely healthcare providers, many hospitals, also behavioral health, senior living. So do a lot of work spanning all the way from brand into performance marketing and kind of the holistic MarCom suite in the middle. So I'll share a little bit about my background, then we'll pass it to you, Dan. But I am a long timer in the healthcare PR communications marketing space. I began my career at Burson Marsteller, so pre-BCW days in the PR field, spent time client side at Intel for a number of years, and then was part of the team that built and eventually sold Revive Health, a boutique MarCom agency, to Weber Shandwick and IPG. And so a lot of those experiences really informed the basic thesis of Unlock Health and needing to do something a little bit differently in the agency world. I know we're going to talk a lot today about disruption and what all of these convergences of different markets means for our business, but a lot of that history really informed where we are today. So it's great to be here.
Hey.
And I'll jump on from what Shannon said. So good morning, Paul. Good to see you. We're looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks at the conference. So yeah, just building on what Shannon said, a large part of my role is bringing together the technology componentry to be able to support what we're doing from an agency perspective. And that's really sort of what we'll get into a little bit today. But being able to work with customers, work with partners to be able to blend the right mix of services and technology together to drive growth. And it's, a lot of my day is spent working with clients, working with customers to really understand what the right mix of services and technology look like to drive growth, and ultimately that CFO defensible return on investment that they realize in being able to put marketing dollars out in the field.
And I know we're going to talk a little bit about the background of what makes the industry particularly ripe for disruption right now. And we're going to talk about the way you've structured your offering. And I just want to be clear about how your approach works and how it fits into sort of the historical view of a full service or a fully integrated offering, because I think in the past people have used the word integrated to essentially mean an ad agency that buys a bunch of firms to do everything else. So, the ad guys take care of the paid, and then they have units to take care of the earned, shared, and owned channels. Often, but perhaps not always subordinate to advertising, which has tended to be the 800-pound gorilla simply because its revenues are more significant. But from your description, Shannon, it sounds as though you structured it the way I always felt it theoretically ought to be structured, which is to say that at the center is consulting, and the consulting is channel and media neutral. And then you bring in the other disciplines, the various sort of full service disciplines, in the proportions that make sense for solving a particular client problem. And very rarely have I seen that implemented. And I don't know if it's because the wrong people have been implemented and they had incentives to implement it in a suboptimal way, or whether it simply works well in theory but not in practice. Tell me a little bit about your experience to date in how you've put this offer together and how it's been received by clients.
Yeah, I mean, you described it really well, Paul. That is ultimately what we're going for, is beginning with this heart of, you can think of it as consulting, or you can just think of it as expertise around an industry and the business problems that that industry or those client organizations face. And when you get really deep into that and are able to have those strategic conversations, with the marketing, the communications leader, sometimes we're working with the head of strategy, sometimes with the full C-suite, then we're able to say, okay, based on that business challenge and the audiences you need to reach to solve that business challenge, we can bring together the right mix of whether it's media or communications channels, paid, earned, owned, all of that, but also the right technology components. Because I think some of what we'll get into today, and this is where Dan has a lot of expertise, is being able to demonstrate the ROI of that channel mix is really important, but even more challenging when you're looking at how all of these different pieces come together. So that's what we're trying to solve for, is bigger business challenges. Start with the expertise, start with the consulting, wrap it with the right mix of channels, services, and technologies, and then prove out its impact in the wild. So that's exactly what we're looking to do.
Okay, forgive me, I'm not diminishing the strategic thinking that went into this in any way, but that seems like such an obvious idea and such an obvious approach. Yeah. I'd like to understand why it hasn't happened, or why it hasn't worked, or why it hasn't become the universal model for our industry long before 2023.
Yeah, so I'll give you my opinion. I don't know that I know the exact answer. I have two hypotheses though, Paul. So one of them is, oftentimes in some of the really big holding companies, larger agencies, there are kind of different agencies focused on different parts of the channel mix. And so I think that sometimes makes it difficult for one particular agency to own all of it. Now, I do think that a number of the holding companies are trying to solve this with teams that span and come out of all of the different agencies that they have in the mix. But that brings me to my second hypothesis of why this hasn't worked really well, is I think that to be able to tie together all of the right components and to actually know what is the best mix of services and technologies, you have to have incredibly deep expertise in the industry. And so that's where I think that a lot of the kind of pulling together many pieces and parts from a lot of different places falls down, because you may then have the right set of skills, capabilities, channels, but it's really hard to put them all together in the right way if your team isn't incredibly deep in the business challenges of that sector that you are working with. So I think that's the other component. And that's why we're really focused on healthcare, but even within that, we are very deeply focused on healthcare providers. I think that gives us the ability to know that industry inside and out, and then to be able to say, because we're working with hundreds of these players across the country, all right, we know the different pieces that need to go together because we've done it before. So those are my hypotheses, but Paul, you probably have your own hypothesis as well, which I'd be curious to hear.
Well, I suspect that the first of your hypotheses is it is one very good structural reason why it hasn't happened, in that you have a number of people who are I promised myself I wasn't going to use this phrase, who have grown up in a single swim lane and who believe that that is the superior discipline. This, well, in my experience, a lot of those people tend to work in advertising, but let's leave that aside for now, whichever it is. And so there is a preordained bias towards that particular discipline. And so integration actually becomes a lead discipline with lots of little support disciplines around it.
Yep.
And I think that's plagued our industry for so long, that the balance between who has the most dollars and who delivers the best thinking is not exactly in synchronicity.
Yeah.
But I also think that we can discuss this if you like. There is a challenge to having a consulting business at the center, or a business problem solving concept at the center, and all of the delivery mechanisms, because I have seen in other agencies that this leads to campaigns that suit the mix of capabilities that the agency has, which are not always perfectly aligned with the needs that the clients have. And so at some point, self-interest kicks in, and you want your most profitable or biggest budget services to get the lion's share of the business. I don't know if that makes sense, and I don't know if you've sort of thought that through and have a plan to avoid it. Dan, I sense you itching to throw in some thoughts here.
No, I think we can't be a hammer looking for a nail. I think it's truly working backwards from the business problem and the customer need, and doing what's best for their business, not what's always best for our business in the moment, in the short term. And I think, for a while, clients would work through that with their agency partners. But I think we've reached a moment in time where budgets are more constrained than they've ever been. Resources are harder to come by. Teams are smaller internally, and our clients are looking for one organization that they can partner with across a variety of places that always has the client's best interest in mind, because ultimately that's how they see value for long term. So it's not a short term game that we're playing. It's very much a long term partnership game, and that's easy to say. It's a little bit harder to do in practice, but it's just part of the ethos of what we're building at Unlock Health.
I'm very conscious that what I said earlier about, the need for somebody to be taking that lead consulting role, frankly, I've always thought that should be public relations, and given your background, Shannon, I hope you have some sympathy for that idea. But it also almost always seems to devolve into a sort of turf war, with the advertising agencies advocating for the primacy of advertising, and the digital firms are arguing for digital first, and public relations arguing for earned at the center, and we become territorial about it. And I assume that that's one of the things that, from your perspective, made the public relations, marketing, communications sector ripe for the kind of disruption that you've been seeing over the last year or so.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a big piece of it. There's a few other things that we're also seeing converge that I think is leading towards this kind of moment of disruption. One of them is, I would say, 10, 20 years ago, maybe as recent as 5 years ago, it was appropriate to have some separation between these things, and especially between technology and services, because the MarTech field was more nascent. It was really a lot of figuring out how to start putting them together. But I do think that one of the big disruptions today is this convergence, this consolidation in some ways of technology and services, and almost kind of rendering this idea, to your point, Paul, of digital marketing or digital communications. It's just obsolete, right? That's like us saying, I'm going to do some digital banking today or some digital shopping today, right? It's just banking or shopping, and you're just assuming that digital is built into it. And it goes without saying that the customer consumer journeys are digitized. But I think that's impacting what clients are expecting from their agency partners as well, and making it a lot more difficult to say, hey, that's my digital shop over there. Here's my technology partner over here. Here's some advertising there, and then I'll kind of, pull in PR over there, right? There's this expectation for technology to be embedded within the services themselves, whether it's increasing efficiency, increasing output. It's just creating a new value equation. And we have to deliver on that to our clients because of smaller budgets, more attention to and expectation of clear ROI. And we have to bring those together for our clients, or I just don't think they're going to accept it any longer.
Okay, so you had shared some research about clients being worried that their agencies weren't adapting quickly enough. And certainly I've over the years seen public relations in particular 3 to 5 years behind the technology curve, whether that was, when the internet, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have an internet. So when the internet first arrived, when Web 2.0 was a thing, when social media was a thing. And I've been at meetings where PR people, 3 to 5 years late, were starting to figure out where we fit in that. I will say that my feeling has been that we have been slightly better in recent years than we were. But your discussion of technology at the center makes me wonder what is the difference between having a great tech stack, which is what I hear all the time from PR agencies. We think we'd put our tech stack up against anybody's, and having technology at the center of the business and driving the business. And why is the latter better and more important?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because it ultimately is not about the technology. It's about the insights gained from having the technology that allow you to make smarter decisions about what channels you use in what sequence to solve a business problem. So we can have all of the response-based ad management tools. We can have all of the PR impression-based tools. We can have all of the digital technology and email tools at our disposal. But ultimately, looking at the thread that ties all of them together and saying, are all of these efforts leading towards some sort of demonstrable business impact? And once we know what works, we can do more of what works, and we can guide clients. Maybe more importantly, Paul, we can also figure out what doesn't work, and we can figure out what doesn't work faster. And that is the value of technology for a client, is being able to move faster, to make decisions faster, which ultimately drives speed to revenue, speed to brand performance, speed to making an impact in a market. And you can only get that if you have the technology, yes, but also if you have the ability to do something based on the insights that you glean from the technology. And I think that's super important when we talk about impact of a marketing team, of a PR team working together.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit too about what's going on the client side of the business. I spend more time with CCOs than I do with CMOs, so I'm prepared to be proven wrong when it comes to CMOs. But my feeling about CCOs is that they haven't necessarily been any faster than their agency partners to embrace new technologies or to put technology and the kind of things you're talking about, Dan, in terms of, in customer or stakeholder insights at the center of what they do. So what kind of changes have you seen on the client side over the last few years that makes this particularly relevant now?
Yeah, I think there's probably two things that come to mind. One, I think global, and one specific to our healthcare industry. I think the first is that chief marketing officers, in terms of tenure, continues to decline. Interestingly enough, post-COVID, right? So the average tenure is now less than 4 years of a chief marketing officer. And I think we see chief marketing officers who are now not single vertical or single capability specific. They really have to be able to see the gamut of how all of the various parts of a marketing mix come together. I think we see this front and center in healthcare, which is the second part of this. I mean, you mentioned PR is typically 4 to 5 years behind. Healthcare as an industry is typically a decade behind in terms of leveraging the latest tools and technologies and data at their disposal. And I think it's interesting in healthcare when we talk to our clients, because the decision-making power in healthcare is shifting to the consumer, right? It was typically referral driven. It was, I go where my doctor tells me to go. I trust my physician. All of that is still true, but now I'm also going to go to Dr. Google and I'm going to search for what ails me. And I'm going to make a decision based on price or convenience. That decision-making power shifting to the consumer puts the chief marketing officer in the hot seat in a boardroom. I know because I came from the client side. I've been in those boardrooms, right? And there are now boards, CEOs, strategy officers, chief medical officers who are looking at the CMO saying, help us communicate differently. And bring the disruptive technologies to the fold. And that's a seat that most healthcare CMOs typically haven't had until the last 3 to 5 years, and they suddenly are getting invited to these sessions, these strategic planning sessions, not as a cost center, but as an investment center, saying we now see the marketing team as our pathway to more profitable, sustainable growth.
Mm-hmm. And yet, again, some of the research that you showed me suggests that the majority, perhaps the vast majority of marketers feel like they don't have the budget and by inference, the influence necessary for all the challenges that the market is throwing up at them these days. And I wondered if you had some thoughts on why that was, and is that essentially a failure on the part of marketing, and again, by extension, communications and public relations, to prove its value, to demonstrate, hard ROI numbers?
Yeah. I think the short answer to your question is yes, Paul, and then I'll give a longer answer to it. So, I think you're referencing there was some really good work done by Gartner earlier this year with surveys of marketing and communications leaders. And they found that 71% of marketing leaders say they lack the budget to deliver on their business strategy. So when we think about the reasons behind that, there are a couple of factors in my mind. One is, yes, this lack of consistent and clear ROI to be able to justify marketing and communications as investment centers versus cost centers. That's one big piece. And then I also think there have probably been, maybe connected to that, historical overspend in areas that have not delivered the value that was expected. When you think about MarTech stacks, which I know you referenced earlier, Paul, I think there's been a bit of a pendulum swing there. So if you think about, again, 10, 15 years ago, really only the most sophisticated communications and marketing leaders knew how to deploy those integrated technologies to support the full customer journey. Then MarTech became increasingly in vogue. Like you said, everyone's talking about their tech stacks. There's an explosion of investment in this discipline, but yet often without the internal skills to effectively deploy it. So that meant that you're putting a lot of money into this, you're seeing that tech stack often become a little bit, ironically, both bloated and underutilized. And this is leading to, I think, the next pendulum swing, right? In that same Gartner study, it talked about how 3/4 of marketers say they are under pressure to cut back their MarTech spend now, when ironically, that's what you need to prove ROI. And I do think this is creating a fundamentally different set of pressures on agency partners, because the clients are saying, look, I got to cut back on these spends on a number of these different areas, but I still have to prove ROI. And for me to give you more budget, you need to demonstrate to me that what we're doing is a revenue center. And so then now it is on us to be able to prove that out, demonstrate it. And therefore, I just don't think we have any alternative than to actually invest in our own technology stack to prove out the ROI, both to justify the spend, but much more importantly, and I think this goes a little bit back to your earlier point, Paul, around kind of that consulting being at the center and the way to make sure that the self-interest doesn't get in the way. If we are really holding ourselves accountable to report on true ROI and revenue generation for all of the different channels, that is what informs where the dollars go. And then that is ultimately doing what is best for the client to solve that business problem. But it also allows us to know where we need to invest our time to build out more capabilities too.
How do you avoid the problem that has been expressed to me by a number of people on the client side of the business, that what you're talking about there, measuring the ROI of the work you do, is a little like marking your own homework?
Fair point. I'll let Dan, I know you think about this a lot.
Yeah, I think one of the conversations we have with almost every client is, how does your CFO define ROI? Because ultimately, you're right, Paul. If marketers in a vacuum define their own ROI, they would rely on the pieces completely in their control.
Oh,
right?
It's the reason, I mean, forgive me for a mini rant. It's the reason why we still see, even in Sabre Awards entries, which are supposedly the best work that's being done around the industry, that people in developed markets continue to use advertising equivalency as a measure of PR success, is that, it allows you to say, well, we spent this much on advertising and got this, and we spent this much on PR and we got this, and that's a comparison, and that's how it works out. When the reality is that none of it is delivering what I would call ROI. None of that is a measure of what you're getting back for every dollar spent.
Completely agree with you. No, rant accepted and rant completely agreed, because measurement cannot be related to vanity metrics, right? It also cannot be isolated to a single channel or a single capability. Really, the marketer of the future will have a conversation and a dialogue with their chief financial officer and ultimately ask the question, how do you define, Mrs. or Mr. CFO, the impact of marketing? And when we talk to clients, it's revenue, right?
But to your point earlier, marketers can control how much of their message is delivered. They can't control, or they don't know that they can control, how people will react once the message has been received.
Right.
And actually, there's a difference between delivering the message and receiving the message, and a lot of interference in between. But it's, I don't want this to turn into a discussion of ROI, which wasn't what we talked about earlier. But obviously, it's central to the approach that you have, and critical to your success going forward. And yes, my experience is that CFOs and CEOs have a totally different definition of ROI, which is, of course, why we see the turnover that we see right now in senior marketing positions. And I'm not sure, I'm not sure that agencies, in addition to my worry that we're marking our own homework, I'm also not sure that agencies are doing enough to help their clients get job security.
Yeah.
And partly it's because we don't push back enough traditionally, right? Or we don't have the data with which to push back.
I think that's exactly right. We don't have the data to push back. We're also somewhat afraid of going that final mile to take the accountability for where my marketing spend went. And if there is, so we see this in healthcare with our clients all the time of, I spent a lot of money on a hip replacement campaign that drove qualified individuals to practice, and the practice made them wait on hold for 10 minutes. So ultimately, what have you done? You've marketed for a competitor. You have qualified markets and moved them through, right? So the marketer of the future doesn't just throw their hands up at that. And we, as Unlock Health, train and empower clients to lean into that situation to say, because you've spent X and you're the guarantor of marketing's investment, you now have an accountability to work with your practices, to work with your clinical leaders, to work with your clients, to open up the funnel. So ultimately, everyone is better. It is seeking better in every capacity using data.
So continuing in the theme of disruption, I think the last year or so, we've held a number of our own events around the world. I've been to other events, including Cannes. My business partner was in Davos. We've got PRovokeGlobal coming up, and a thread running through all of them, and through nearly every podcast that I've been involved with in the last year, is that the next great disruptor of our business is going to be AI. Mm-hmm. Now the bulk of the focus, I think, has been misdirected. I think we're all obsessed with generative AI and whether it's going to start writing press releases better than our account executives can. But there is a real potential for disruption by AI in our business. And how are you thinking about that? And how are you planning for that in the way that you build your firm?
Yeah, so we do have a dedicated innovation team at Unlock Health where we are really focused on, from an AI perspective, how are we applying it to our teams and our work product to make it more efficient? But more importantly, how are we finding ways to utilize it to deliver more value and new offerings to clients that we would not have otherwise been able to? As a reference point, you're probably familiar with Ethan Malik. He's at Wharton, does phenomenal work, and did this study recently with Boston Consulting Group, which showed that consultants, professional services folks who utilize AI not only manage to tackle 12% more tasks, but also deliver 40% better results. That's all fine and well. What's really interesting to me, though, is the idea of AI as a bit of a performance equalizer. So, the consultants, the professional services folks with lesser skills saw the most significant boost, right? With like productivity soaring, I think it was in the lower 40% or so. So the whole idea there for me is this classic adage of AI won't replace marketing and communications practitioners, but those who use AI will replace those who don't. And that means that agencies that use AI effectively will replace agencies that don't. So I think we're seeing it, in a number of areas where, for performance marketing, we're able to use the tool to do more A/B testing more effectively. Obviously, to your point, like generative AI is not everything. It does help though with things like inspiration, mood boards, research, a lot of efficiency and effectiveness on that front. But I actually think that where it becomes a lot more interesting is when we talk about the tech stack that we're building. And one of our teams has been running campaigns through paid search for 13 years. And all of that data is in a core data set, but to be able to mine that for insights of being able to know very quickly, what keywords do and don't work because of, millions of data points that we have analyzed through AI, that's where it gets to be a lot more insights driven versus just, yep, we're going to do these things more efficiently. We can give clients a little bit more for the same budget.
So I think we've touched on a lot of the things that are going to define the agency of the future, and that are going to disrupt agencies that are not fast enough to change. But briefly, and just to conclude, I guess, what are the big changes that you see taking place in both the marketing sector and the agency business in particular over the next few years, and what's going to define successful agencies in this new environment?
For me, I think the definition of future success is convergence. So convergence of technology and services, convergence of brand and performance marketing, convergence of industry-specific expertise and deep Marcom savvy. It is just where the industry is headed. It is why we built Unlock Health. And I think with budget pressures, limited time, marketing and communications leaders, clients just don't have the time or money to stitch all of these solutions together, but they have to be put together by someone. So I think that is the big theme and really why we've built what we've built. But Dan, I would love to hear your thoughts too.
I literally couldn't have said it any better. I completely agree with everything Shannon said. The only thing I would add is that the marketer of the future will be equal parts data strategist, technologist, and marketer of the past, right? That's really the remit of the future that I think allows marketing and communications folks to be successful.
Okay, so I'm going to be really annoying now because I already said finally, and as soon as you started talking, Shannon, I thought, no, I need to follow up. So
Great.
What are the implications of this for the kind of people we need to bring into our business? Because it seems to me that if the ability to bring all this together is what, that convergence is what defines success, there are and if you're correct, right, let's assume for the moment that you are,
yes, please.
then it seems to me that the PR professional of 10 years ago or 5 years ago or maybe even 2 years ago is not necessarily fit for purpose in this new world, or that those who can't adapt and change are not, and that we need to bring in a lot of people with skills that are not the skills that we relied on in the past. We're going to need to recruit from places that were not the places we relied on for talent in the past. How does the talent equation change as a result of all this?
We think about this so much, Paul. I feel like we're talking about this every day. So for me, I think there's two ways to look at it. One is absolutely we are going to need to bring in more people with more diversity of skill sets and backgrounds, not just the traditional set of capabilities. But for me, that's not even the most important part. It's more that qualitative element of people, because I believe that if you get folks who have deep intellectual curiosity, a hunger for trying new things and learning new things, I don't care if they have proven the ability to analyze data, do earned media, write effective content and make buys on Google. They can learn. So for me, it's just about getting the people with the right frame of mind, commitment to building something fundamentally new for the agency. And if you get those people together, that's where the magic happens. And that's what we're trying to drive.
Great. Any additional thoughts on that, Dan, before we wind up?
I think to me, it's
I
not
assume
about.
you're fairly non-traditional, right?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't come from an agency background. I came from a client background and a technology and SaaS background, and I think to me, it's almost less about the individual and more about how leaders build teams and effective teams, right? Because clients need the domain expertise in whatever it is they're doing, automotive, healthcare, hospitality. You need that, right? And I think it's the same for legacy PR professionals. There's an art to great PR. There's an art to great copywriting. We need those. But then we also have to have the left brain, right brain, right? We have to complement those individuals with domain expertise with folks who have a separate or new domain expertise. True beauty is being able to meld those together in an effective team. And I think that's what really sets both client side teams and agency teams apart.
Right. So, and again, I have one more question, and then I really will wrap it up. Okay. But you're doing this in a very specific and defined sector, right? So you're a healthcare specialist, but you're also really payer provider specialists.
Mm-hmm.
Is the model that you've built in that sector replicable across the rest of our industry? Does it work as well? Does it have the same potential in, I mean, technology? Okay, sure, but fashion and beauty, or travel and leisure, or the food and beverage categories? Do you think it work? Do you think you've got a sort of universal model that you're just applying in one particularly lucrative sector, or do you think it's a universal idea?
I'll say one thing. I don't know if I have a strong opinion on this, but I think if you can find me a chief marketing officer or a chief client officer who is not experiencing an unparalleled amount of complexity, budget constraint, the need to manage channels and partners all more cohesively, that would be really interesting. I haven't met that person yet, but I think that cuts across all verticals. And I think that lends towards the model we're building of that single source partner that brings domain expertise. I would like to think it's replicable, because ultimately the client challenges tend to be somewhat the same across verticals. Shannon, I don't know what you think.
I agree. I totally agree with that. I think it should be replicable. It's all about being able to address and understand a cluster of business problems within a particular sector or industry. So I totally agree.
Great. Okay. I want to thank both of you for your time today, for laying the groundwork for what I hope will be a constant theme of Provoke Global, which, particularly our Entrepreneurs Forum, which is for agency leaders, who I think need to think through all of these issues and what the agency of the future looks like, and how disruption is going to upend a lot of what we've done in the past. And I hope our audience has enjoyed this conversation, and there are still tickets available for Provoke Global. So if you want to hear more of this kind of challenging, provocative, forward-looking content, I hope you'll join us in Washington, D.C. in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much, Dan and Shannon.
Thank you so much, Paul. Always good spending time together. Looking forward to seeing you at the event soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.